Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee, and do powerfully command thee, O spirit. Elon, I, the Tetragrammaton, the Lord God Most High, I do exercise thee, and do powerfully command.
In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Glancing this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting, and he asked the one in the wrong, "Hey you, why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" And the man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed that fucking Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Exodus 2:11 through 2:15. Welcome everybody, I'm John and this is the Abracast. We're conducting our way through Exodus, much like we did Genesis in prior episodes. If you're interested in those, you can find them on the featured topic link at Abracast.com. So, not much in the way of, we have a tremendous amount of material to get through, so I'm just going to roll right into it. In the Legend of the Jews, with the Legend of the Jews, we have this account, and Moses also ends up in Midian, but he has an adventure first. So we're going to kind of talk about that. So on the flight out of Egypt, where he's running and hiding from it, by the way, I didn't mention it, but killing a guy by yelling the name of God at him is pretty fucking heavy metal. And that's the way he did in this Egyptian slave master. As he saw him beating this Egyptian, and he just got done raping his wife, and he's beating this like an Egyptian, and Moses just stops him, and he's like, "Yo, Tetragrammaton!" And the fucking guy just turns into a corpse. It's pretty cool. But this is just one of the many kind of things that we see with them using magic being a big part of this, specifically Moses' story. We're actually going to run into a little bit of it right here. So he's on this flight out, and there's this war that broke out between Ethiopia and these nations of the east. And Kikanos, the king, advanced against the enemy with a great army, and he left Balaam. Balaam shouldn't be an absolute stranger to you guys if you've been listening to the show for a long time, because him and specifically his two sons, Yanez and Yambrez, pop up quite a lot. They made appearances in 2 of my graphic novels. They appear in the Jin Jihad and also the Ages. Both of these fucking clowns show up in there. But I don't know if these are the... I'm going to hold commenting further to see how this story pans out here with Ginsburg's book. Balaam left his 2 sons behind to keep guard over his capital and to take charge of the people remaining. The absence of the king gave Balaam an opportunity of winning his subjects over to his side, and he was because he wanted to get put upon the throne. And these 2 sons were set over the army as generals to cut off Kikanos from this capital. Balaam and his sons invested in the city so no one could enter it against their will. On 2 sides, they made the walls higher, and on the 3rd side, they dug a network of canals into which they conducted the waters of the river, girding the whole of the land of Ethiopia. And on the 4th side, their magic arts collected a large swarm of snakes and scorpions. Thus, none could depart and none could enter. So we're going to see that Yanez and Yambrez are these magic users. Meantime, Kikanos succeeded in subjugating the rebellious nations, and when he returned at the head of this victorious army, he spied the high city wall from afar, and he and his men said, "The inhabitants of the city, seeing that the war was detained us abroad for a long time, have raised the walls and fortified them, and the kings of Canaan may not be able to enter." On approaching the city gates, which were barred, they cried out to the guards to open up. But Balaam's instructions, they were not permitted to pass through. The skirmish ensued, in which Kikanos lost 130 men. And on the morrow, the combat was continued, and the king with his troops being stationed on the thither bank of the river. This day he lost 30 riders who mounted on their steeds and attempted to swim the stream, and the king ordered the rafts be constructed for the transporting of his men. And when the vessels reached the canals, they were submerged by the water, swirling round and round as though they were driven by mill wheels. Swept away 200 men, 20 from each raft. And the 3rd day they set up about assaulting the city from the side on which the snakes and the scorpions swarmed, but they failed to reach it. The reptiles had killed 170 men. The king, destined from attacking the city, but for the space of 9 years he surrounded it so that no one could come out or go in. While the siege was in progress, Moses appeared to the king's camp on his flight before Pharaoh, and at once he found favor with Kikanos and his whole army, and he exercised the attraction upon all that saw him, for he was slender like a palm tree, and his countenance shone as the morning sun, and his strength was equal to a lion. So deep was the king's affection for him that he appointed him to be his commander-in-chief of his forces. And at the end of 9 years, Kikanos fell prey to a mortal disease, and he died on the 7th day of his illness. And his servants embalmed him, buried him in the opposite to the city gates towards the land of Egypt. And over his grave they erected a magnificent structure, strong and high upon the walls, whereof they engraved all the mighty deeds and battles of the dead king. Now, after the death of Kikanos, his men were greatly grieved on the account of the war, and one said to the other, "Counsel us, what shall we do at this time? We have been abiding in the wilderness away from our homes for 9 years. If we fight against the city, many of us will fall dead. And if we remain here, besieging it, we shall also die. For now the princes of Amram and the children of the east will hear that our king is dead, and they will attack us suddenly, and they will fight with us. not a remnant will be left. Therefore, let us go and set a king over us, and we will remain here besieging the city until it surrenders to us. So here it is. This is the story of the king of Moses becoming the king of Ethiopia. They could find none except Moses fit to be their king. They hastened and stripped off each man of his upper garments and cast him in a heap on the ground, making a high place on top of which they set Moses. And they blew trumpets and called out before him, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" And all the people and all the nobles swore to him and gave him an Adonia for a wife, and the Ethiopian queen, who is the widow of Kykenos. And they made Moses king over them that day. They also issued a proclamation commanding every man to give Moses of what he possessed. And upon the high place they spread a sheet wherein each one cast something. This would be a gold nose ring, or a coin, an onyx stone, pearls, gold, and silver in great abundance. Well, Moses was 27 years old when he became the king of Ethiopia, and he reigned for 40 years. And on the 7th day of his reign, all the people assembled and came before him and asked his counsel as to what would be done to the city they were besieging. And the king answered him. He said, "Look, if you will hearken to my words, the city will be delivered into our hands. Proclaim with a loud voice throughout the whole camp unto all the people, saying, Thus saith the king, Go to the forest and fetch hither of young storks, each man one fledgling in his hand. And if there be any man that transgresseth the word of the king, do not bring a bird, he shall die. The king shall take all belonging to him. And when you have brought them, they shall be in your keeping, and you shall rear them until they grow up, and you shall teach them to fly as the hawk flieth." And all the people did according to the word of Moses. And after the young storks had grown to full size, he ordered them to be starved for 3 days. And on the 3rd day, the king said to them, "Let every man put his armor and gird his sword upon him, and each one of these men shall mount a horse, and each shall set the stork upon his hand. And we will rise up and fight the city opposite of the place of the serpents." When they came to the appointed spot, the king saith to them, "Let each man set forth his young stork to descend upon the serpents." Thus they did, and the birds swooped down and devoured all the reptiles and destroyed them after the serpents were removed. In this way the men fought against the city, subdued it, and killed all of its inhabitants. But of the people besieging it, not one died. When Balaam saw that the city had fallen into the hands of the besiegers, he exercised his magic arts, which enabled him to fly through the air and to be carried with him and his 2 sons, Yanez and Yambres, and his 8 brothers, and they all took refuge in Egypt, which is going to become important. Seeing that they had been saved by the king, the city was taken by his good counsel, and the people became even more attached to him. They set the royal crown upon his head, and they gave him Adonai, the widow of Kykenos, as his wife. But Moses feared the stern God of his fathers, and he went unto Adonai, and he went not into Adonai, nor did he turn his eye towards her, for he remembered how Abraham made his servant Eliezer swear, saying to him, "Thou shalt not take a wife for my son of the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell." And he also remembered that Isaac did when Jacob fled before his brother Esau, and how he commanded his son, saying, "Thou shalt not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan, nor ally thyself by marriage with any of the children of Ham. For the Lord our God gave Ham, the son of Noah, and all his seeds as slaves to the children of Shem and Japheth forever." At the time, Amram and the children of the east heard that Kinkinos, the king of Ethiopia, had died, and they rose up against the Ethiopians. But Moses went forth with a mighty army to fight against the rebellious nations, and he subdued them, first the children of the east, and then Aram. Moses continued to prosper in his kingdom. He conducted a government with justice and righteousness and integrity, and his people loved him and feared him. In the 40th year of his reign, while he was sitting upon his throne one day, surrounded by all the nobles, Adonai, the queen, who was seated before him, rose up and spake. What is this thing which you, the people of Ethiopia, have done these many days? Surely you know that during the 40 years this man hath reigned over you. He hath not approached me, nor hath he worshipped the gods of Ethiopia. Now, therefore, let this man reign over you no more. For he is not our flesh. Behold, Monarchos, my son, is grown up, and let him reign over you. It is better for you to serve the son of your Lord than a stranger, a slave of the king of Egypt. The whole day the people and the nobles contended with one another whether to pay heed to the words of this queen. The officers of the army remained faithful to Moses, but the people of the city were in favor of crowning the son of their former lord as king. The following morning they rose up and they made Monarchos, the son of Kinkinos, king over them. But they were afraid to stretch forth their hand against Moses, for the Lord was with him. They also remembered the oath that he had sworn unto Moses, and therefore they did him no harm. Moreover, they gave many presents to him and dismissed him with great honors. And when Moses left Ethiopia in the 67th year of his age, it was the time appointed by God in the days of old to bring Israel forth from the affliction of the children of Ham. But fearing to return to Egypt on account of Pharaoh, Moses journeyed to the land of Midian. So in the land of Midian, we find this dude named Jethro. That wasn't his only name. He had many names. And he used to be an idolatrous priest. So he was a pagan, but he had secretly come to know the one true God, the God of the Israelites, and he stepped down from his priestly station. He was like, look, I'm getting too old to do this or whatever. But the townsfolk of Midian knew that it was a sham. They were like, look, this guy, this motherfucker, he's just not doing the services anymore because he's actually a follower of a god and not our many gods. So Jethro's transformation from an idolist priest, this is according to Legends of the Jews, into a God-fearing man is conveyed by his 7 names. He is called Jether because the Torah contains an additional section about him. Jethro, he overflowed with good deeds. And Hobab, the beloved son of God. Ruel, the friend of God. Heber, the associate of God. Putiel, he that hath renounced idolatry. And Kenai, he was zealous for God, and he acquired the Torah. So for the sake of time, I'm going to go hit the red letter for this. Now, this is Exodus 2:16. A priest of Midian who had 7 daughters. And they came to draw water and to fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away. But Moses got up and came to their rescue, and he watered their flock. So the Legend of the Jews obviously goes into a little bit more detail about this. They say that the 7 daughters of Jethro were being harassed because of the townsfolk understood that Jethro was no longer a pagan, and they were like being shitty towards these sisters. The Legend of the Jews, we're switching. The rudeness of the shepherds reached its climax the very day of Moses' arrival. First, they deprived the maidens of water they had drawn for themselves and attempted to do violence to them. And then they threw them into the water with the intent to kill them. And at this moment Moses appeared, and he dragged the maidens out of the water, and he gave the flocks to drink, first Jethro's and then the flocks of the shepherds, although the latter did not deserve his true offices. True, he did them service, but with little trouble to himself, for he had only to draw a bucketful, and that water flowed so copiously that it sufficed for all the herd. So this is a magical act. This is God multiplying the water in the bucket. He did not cease to flow until Moses withdrew from the well. The same well which Jacob had met Rachel, his future wife, and the same well that God created at the beginning of the world, the opening of which he made in the twilight of the first Sabbath eve. Jethro's daughter, I love it when they link geography to the past stories. I think we're going to get into that here. Maybe a little bit more. Jethro's daughters thanked Moses for the assistance that he afforded them, but Moses warded off their gratitude, saying, "Your thanks are due to the Egyptian that I killed, on the account of whom I had to flee from Egypt. Had it not been for him, I would not be here now." One of the 7 maidens whom Moses saw at the well attracted his notice, in particular on the account of her modest demeanor. And he made her a proposal of marriage, but her name is Zipporah. Zipporah repulsed him, saying, "The Father has a tree in his garden with which he tests every man that expresses a desire to marry one of his daughters. And as soon as the suitor touches the tree, he is devoured by it." And Moses says, "Whence has he the tree?" He says, "Where's this fucking tree at? Hold my beer." And Zipporah, it is the rod that the Holy One, blessed be, created in the twilight of the first Sabbath eve and gave to Adam. He transmitted it to Enoch. From him is descended to Noah, then to Shem, then to Abraham and Isaac, and finally to Jacob, who brought it with him to Egypt, but gave it to his son Joseph. When Joseph died, the Egyptians pillaged his house, and the rod which was in their booty was brought to Pharaoh's palace. At the time, my father was one of the most prominent of the king's sacred scribes, and as such he had the opportunity of seeing the rod. He felt a great desire to possess it, and he stole it and took it out of the house. And on this rod, the ineffable name is graven, and also the 10 plagues that God will cause to visit the Egyptians in a future day. For many years it lay at my father's house, and one day he was walking in his garden carrying it, and it stuck in the ground. And when he attempted to draw it out again, he found that it has sprouted and was putting forth blossoms. That the rod which he tries and that desires to marry his daughter, he insists that our suitors shall attempt to pull it out of the ground, but as soon as they touch it, it devours them. And having given him this account of her father's rod, Zipporah went home and accompanied her sisters, and Moses followed them. Jethro was not a little amazed to see his daughter return so soon from the watering troughs. As a rule, the chicanery they had to suffer from the shepherds detained them until late. No sooner has he heard the report about the wonder-working Egyptian than he exclaimed, "Mayhap he is one of the descendants of Abraham, from whom issued a blessing from the whole world." And he rebuked his daughters for not having invited the stranger that had done them a valuable service to come to their house. And he ordered them to fetch him in hopes that he would take one of his daughters to wife. So she goes to get him. He walks in, and as soon as he walks into Jethro's house, he asks to marry his daughter. And Jethro replies, he says, "If thou canst bring me the rod in my garden, I will give her to thee." Moses went out, and he found the sapphire rod that God had bestowed upon Adam. He was driven forth from paradise, the rod that has reached Jethro after manifold vicissitudes in which he had planted in the garden. Moses uprooted it and carried it to Jethro, who conceived the idea at once that he was the prophet in Israel, concerning whom all the wise men of Egypt had foretold, and that he would destroy their land and its inhabitants. And as soon as this thought struck him, he seized Moses and threw him in a pit, in the expectation that he would meet death there. And indeed, he would have perished if Zipporah had not devised a stratagem to save his life. So he keeps him in this pit for 7 years, and his daughters, Zipporah is like feeding him and like, slipping him. It's whatever you need in the pit to survive. And Zipporah tricks him, and after 7 years, she gets her dad, and she was like, "Hey, you remember the guy you threw in the pit because you were afraid he was going to cause death to all of Egypt and all this?" And Jethro was like, "Yeah, I remember that guy." And she was like, "Look, he's still alive. He must be holy if he survived these 7 years without food and water." And Jethro was like, "Thou hast spoken wisely. Dost thou remember his name?" And Zipporah rejoined, "I remember he called himself Moses, the son of Amram." And Jethro lost no time. He opened up the pit and called out, "Moses, Moses!" And Moses replied, he says, "Here I am." And Jethro drew him up out of the pit, kissed him, and said, "Blessed be God who guarded thee for 7 years in this pit. I acknowledge that he saith, and reviveth, thou art of the holy pious, that through thee God will destroy Egypt in time to come, lead his people out of the land, and drown Pharaoh and his whole army in the sea." Thereupon Jethro gave much money to Moses, and bestowed his daughter Zipporah to him as his wife, and giving her to him under the condition that the children born of the marriage in Jethro's house would be divided into 2 equal classes, one Israelitish and one Egyptian. When Zipporah bore him a son, Moses circumcised him and called him Gershom, as a memorial of the wonder God had done for him. For although he lived in a strange land, the Lord has not refused him aid, even there. Zipporah nursed her first child for 2 years, and in the 3rd year she bore a second son. Remembering the compact with Jethro, Moses realized that his father-in-law would not permit him to circumcise this one too, and he determined to return to Egypt. And he might have the opportunity of bringing up his second son as an Israelite. On the journey thither, Satan appeared to him in the guise of a serpent, and he swallowed Moses down to his extremities. Wow. Zipporah knew by this token that this thing had happened because of her second son had not been circumcised, and she hastened to make good the omission. As soon as she sprinkled the blood on the circumcisions of her husband's feet, the heavenly voice was heard to cry to the serpent, commanding him, "Spew him out!" And Moses came forth and stood up to his feet. Thus Zipporah saved Moses' life twice, from the pit and from the serpent. When Moses arrived in Egypt, he was approached by Daneth and Abiram, the leaders of the Israelites, and they spake, "Comest thou hither to slay us, or dost thou propose to do the same with us as thou didst with the Egyptian?" This drove Moses straightway back to Midian, and he remained there for 2 years until God revealed himself at Horeb. And he said to him, "Go and bring forth my children from the land of Egypt." So Daneth and Abraham were the 2 guys that had called him out. That's how he knew that the word of his misadventure with the Egyptian slave master was public knowledge. And now they're like the leaders of the Israelites there in Egypt. Okay, so meanwhile, in the royal palace, the Pharaoh gets sick. The later years of Israel's bondage in Egypt were the worst. To punish Pharaoh for his cruelty towards the children of Israel, God afflicted him with the plague of leprosy, which covered his whole body from the crown of his head to the soles of his feet. Instead of being chastened by his disease, Pharaoh remained stiff-necked. And he goes on to seek the counsel of Balaam and Jabez and Jambez, and the noble houses and the queen and all the princes and all this stuff. And he's on his deathbed, and they wind up saying, hey, we're going to take the son and we're going to make him the new Pharaoh. And that's what they do. This kid's going to be the new Pharaoh. And things actually get worse for the slaves. The children, back to the book, the children of Israel sighed every day on the account of their dire sufferings, for they had thought that after the Pharaoh's death, his son would lighten their toil. But the new king was worse than his father, and God saw the burden of his children of Israel, and they took their heavy work, and he determined to deliver them. However, it was not for their own sake that God resolved upon the deliverance of the children of Israel, for they were empty of good deeds. The Lord foreknew that once they were redeemed, they would rise up against him and even worship the golden calf. Spoiler alert, he took mercy upon them, for he remembered his covenant with their fathers, and he looked upon their repentance for their sins and accepted their promise to fulfill the word of God after their going forth from Egypt, even before they should hear it. After all, the children of Israel were not wholly without merits. In a high degree, they possessed qualities of extraordinary excellence. There were no incestuous relationships among them. They were not evil-tongued. They didn't change their names. They clung to their Hebrew language, never giving it up. The great fraternal affection prevailed among them. If one happened to finish the tale of his bricks before his neighbors, then it was the habit of helping the others. Therefore God spake, they deserve that I shall have mercy upon them. For if a man shows mercy unto another, then I will have mercy upon them. So Moses, who's back in Midian, has just taken up the role of a shepherd. He's shepherding Jethro's flock around. But he feels this pull to the desert. He feels this longing for the desert. Moses' longing for the desert was irresistible. His prophetic spirit caused him to foresee that his own greatness, the greatness of Israel, would manifest themselves there. In this desert, God's wonders would appear through what would be the same time the grave of the human herd to be entrusted in him in the future, and also his own last resting place. Thus he had premonition at the very time the beginning of his career in the desert would be the scene of this activity, which not only came true to the present order of things, but also will be true in the later days when he will appear in the desert again to lead the promised land, the generation arisen from their graves and that he brought forth from Egyptian bondage. Wandering through the desert, he reached Mount Horeb, which is called by 6 names, each one conveying one of its distinctions. It is a mountain of God, wherein the Lord reveals his law. Bass band for God came there. The mountain of humps, the Lord declared all other mountains unfit for the revelation, as crooked-backed animals are declared unfit for sacrifices. Mountain of abode, because it is the mountain that God desired for his abode. Sinai, because the hatred of God against the heathen began at the time when Israel received the law thereon. And Horeb, the sword, because there the sword of the law is drawn upon sinners. So I love this because you see this idea that Yahweh, the God of the Jews, is actually a mountain god, which we've heard on the show before, right? A couple different times this has come up. I tend to think of him as partially a sky god, but this mountain god idea is great, and that's what all this stuff is kind of alluding to. And we're going to get into probably one of the most famous stories about Moses, and that's the burning bush, right? So our boy Moses is drawing near to Mount Horeb. He was aware at once that it was a holy place, for he noticed the passing birds did not alight upon it. At his approach, the mountain began to move as though to go forward and meet him, and it settled back into quietude only when its foot rested upon it. The first thing Moses noted was the wonderful burning bush, the upper part of which was a blazing flame, neither consuming the bush nor preventing it from bearing blossoms as it burnt. For the celestial fire had three peculiar qualities. It produced blossoms. It did not consume the object around it which it plays. It is a black color. The fire that Moses saw in the bush was the appearance of the angel Michael, who had descended as the forerunner of the Shekinah herself to come down presently. It was the wish of God to hold converse with Moses, who, however, was not inclined to permit any interruptions of the work under his charge. Therefore, God startled him with the wonderful phenomenon of the burning thorn bush and brought Moses to a stop, and then God spoke to him. Were there good reasons for selecting the thorn bush as the vessel for the divine vision? It was clean, for the heathen could not use it to make idols. God's choosing to dwell in the stunted thorn bush conveyed knowledge to Moses that he suffered along with Israel. Furthermore, Moses was taught that there is nothing in nature, not even the insignificant thorn bush, that can exist without the presence of the Shekinah. Besides the thorn bush, many be taken as the symbol for Israel in several respects. The thorn bush is the lowliest of all species of trees, for the condition of Israel is the exile is the lowliest as compared with that of all other nations. But as the thorn bush releases no bird that alights upon it without lacerating its wings, so the nation that subjugate Israel will be punished. Also, as a garden hedge is made of a thorn bush, so Israel forms the hedge for the world, the garden of God. For without Israel, the world could not endure. Furthermore, as the thorn bush bears thorns and roses alike, so Israel has pious and impious members. As its thorn bush requires ample water for its growth, so Israel can prosper only through the Torah, the celestial water. The thorn bush, the leaf of which consists of 5 leaflets, as to indicate to Moses that God has resolved to redeem Israel only for the sake of its merits of 5 pious men: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Aaron, and Moses. The number represented by the letters composing the Hebrew word for thorn bush, Sena, add up to 122 to convey that Moses would reach the age of 120 years. I'm sorry, it's 120 years. To convey that Moses would reach the age of 120 years. and that the Shekinah would rest on Mount Horeb for 120 days. And finally, in order to give Moses an illustration of his modesty, God descended from the exalted heavens and spake to him from a lonely thorn bush instead of the summit of a lofty mountaintop of a stately cedar tree. The voice called his name twice, and he answered, Here I am. What is my father's wish? And God replied, saying, I am not thy father, but I desire to refrain from terrifying thee. Therefore I spoke with thy father's voice. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. These words rejoiced Moses greatly, for not only was his father Amram's name pronounced in the same breath with the names of the three patriarchs, but it came before theirs as though he ranked higher than any other. Moses said not a word. In silent reverence before the divine vision, he covered his face, and when God disclosed his mission to him, he charged him of bringing the Israelites forth from the land of Egypt. And he answered with humility, Who am I that I should go unto Pharaoh and bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt? Therefore God spake, Moses, thou art meek, and I will reward thee for thy modesty. I will deliver the whole land of Egypt unto thine hand, and besides I will let thee ascend unto the throne of my glory, and look upon all the angels of the heavens. And hereupon God commanded Metatron, the angel of the face, to conduct Moses to the central regions amid the sounds of music and songs. And he commanded him furthermore to summon 30,000 angels to serve as his bodyguard, 15,000 on the right and 15,000 on the left. In abject terror, Moses asked Metatron, Who art thou? And the angel replied, I am Enoch, the son of Jared, thy ancestor, and God has charged me to accompany thee to his throne. But Moses demurred, saying, But I'm flesh and blood. I can't look upon the countenance of an angel. Whereupon Metatron changed Moses' flesh into torches of fire, and his eyes into Merkabah wheels, his strength into an angel's, and his tongue into flame. And he took him to heaven to reunite with the 30,000 angels, one half moving to the right of them and one half to the left of them. So Metatron here if you missed the Genesis episodes, like I said, you can catch them up in the feature topic link. But so Enoch was this guy, he was this righteous guy, and it actually showed up in the last episode when they were talking about how the Shekinah retreated from Earth, because why the Shekinah retreated from Earth, and every time one of these atrocities would happen, she would move further away from Earth into a like a tighter layer of heaven. And they mentioned this, one of these atrocities being what was going on at the time of Enoch, and what that was whatever was going on in the world to cause God to want to flood it, was basically the atrocities that were happening to Enoch. So this is the same thing that spurred Noah into building the ark, but instead of Enoch going on the ark with Noah, God actually translated him into an angel. And the Hebrews in some of these mythology pieces, in the Kabbalah and this kind of stuff, reference or will say that Metatron is the most powerful of the archangels in the world, and there's this beautiful sort of idea of this righteous man being anointed and dressed as an angel to be the face of God. In some ways, it's a precursor to a Messiah figure, because all the other angels were manufactured. Angels are created, they're not born. So there's a factory or something pumping out these angels, and their jobs in some cases of these stories are just to kind of float around in these mosh pits around the throne of God, singing holy, 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 and all of this stuff, automatons, or just robots programmed to worship God. But in this case, this guy is, in essence, is a human, or was a human first, and then became an angel. So he's like this messianic figure. One of the ways that I think about him is he's kind of like an axis mundi, the navel of the world. It's where the sacred and the mundane connect. In the case of a Jesus, God becoming a man, well, it's kind of like an inverse of that. And I know I feel like I'm babbling. I have a lot to say about Metatron. I do. He is also, it makes appearances in some of my graphic novels and comic books. So he's an interesting figure, and we go at length and talk about Enoch and the books of Enoch and all of that stuff. So if this figure fascinates you like it fascinates me, and if you missed those episodes, feel free to go back to them. So speaking of the books of Enoch, so like the books of Enoch, he gets a tour around the universe or whatever, the heavens and all of this stuff. It's like they load him up on and they take him out and they give him a tour of heaven and all this. And this kind of what happens to Moses here. But he's now Metatron is now the tour guide. In the first heaven, Moses saw streams upon streams of water, and he observed that the whole heaven consisted of windows, in each of which angels were stationed, and Metatron named and pointed out all the windows of heaven to him. The windows of prayer, and the window of supplication, of weeping and joy, and starvation and wealth, and poverty and war and peace and conception and birth, as showers and soft rains, sin and repentance, life and death, pestilence and healing, sickness and health, and many windows more. And in the second heaven, Moses saw the angel Nuriel standing 300 parasangs high with his retinue of 50 myriads of angels, all fashioned out of water and fire, and all keeping their faces turned towards the Shekinah, while they sang songs of praise to God. And Metatron explained to Moses that these were the angels set over the clouds and the winds and the rains, and who return speedily as soon as they have executed their will of the Creator. And they stationed the second of the heavens there to proclaim the praise of God. And in the third heaven, Moses saw an angel so tall it would take a human being 500 years to climb to its height. And he had 7,000 heads, and each head having as many mouths, each mouth as many tongues, and each tongue as many sayings as he, together with his suit of 70,000 myriads of angels made of white fire, praised and extolled the Lord. These, said Metatron to Moses, are called Irilim, and they are appointed over the grass and the trees and the fruits and the grains, and as soon as they have done the will of their Creator, they return to their place assigned to them and praise God. The fourth heaven saw a temple, and the pillar made of red fire, and the staves of green fire, and the thresholds of white fire, the boards and clasps of flaming fire, and the gates of carbuncles and pinnacles of rubies. Angels were entering the temple and giving praise to God there in response to a question from Moses. Metatron told them that they presided over the earth, the sun, the moon, the stars, and other celestial bodies, and all of them intone songs before God. In this heaven, Moses noticed that the two great planets, Venus and Mars, each as large as the whole earth, and concerning these he asked to what purpose they had been created, and Metatron explained thereupon that Venus lies on the sun to cool off the summer, else he would scorch the earth, and Mars lies upon the moon to impart warmth to her, lest she freezes the earth. Arrived in the fifth heaven, Moses saw hosts of angels, whose nether parts were of snow, and their upper parts were of fire. And the snow did not melt, and the fire was not extinguished, for God established the perfect harmony between these two elements. These angels, called Ishim, have had nothing to do since the day of their creation but praise and extol the Lord. For the sixth of the heavens were the millions and myriads of angels praising God, and were called Irin and Kedishim, watchers and holy ones. And their chief was made of hail, and he was so tall it would take 500 years to walk the distance equal to his height. In the last heaven, Moses saw two angels, each 500 parasangs in height, forged out of chains of black fire and red fire. The angels, anger, and Hema, wrath, whom God created at the beginning of the world to execute his will. Moses was disquieted when he looked upon them, but Metatron embraced him and said, Moses, Moses, thou favorite of God, fear not, and be not terrified. Be not terrified. Meanwhile, Moses should be pissing his pants. All these angels made out of fire, 500 parasangs. Moses became calm, and there was another angel in the seventh heaven, different in appearance from all others, and of frightful mien. His height was so great, it would take 500 years to cover the distance equal to it. And from the crown of his head to the soles of his feet, he were studded with glaring eyes, in the sight of which the beholder fell prostrate in awe. This one, said Metatron, addressing Moses, is Samael, who takes the soul away from men. Whither goes he now? Asked Moses, and Metatron replied, to fetch the soul of Job the pious. Thereupon Moses prayed to God these words, O may it be thy will to my God and the God of my father, to not let me fall into the hands of this angel. Here in the highest heavens he saw the seraphim with the 6 wings. With 2 they cover their face, and they gaze not upon the Shekinah. With her 2 feet, which being like a calf's feet, they hide to keep the secret Israel's transgression of the golden calf. With their 3rd pair of wings they fly, and they do the service of the Lord, all exclaiming, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of glory, and the wings of angels are prodigious size. It would take a man 500 years to traverse the length and the breadth, as from one end of the earth to the other. And Moses saw in the 7th heaven the holy Hayat, which support the throne of God, and he beheld so the angel Zagziel, the prince of the Torah and of wisdom, and he teaches the Torah in 70 languages in the souls of men, and therefore they cherish the precepts contained therein as laws revealed by God to Moses on Sinai. From this angel, the horns of glory, Moses himself learnt all the 10 mysteries. Having seen what there is in the 7 heavens, he spoke to God, saying, I will not leave the heavens unless you grant me a gift. And God replied, I give thee the Torah, and men shall call it the laws of Moses. Whew. Okay, that seems like a good place to stop. So thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. I'm John. This is the Abracast. Please remember to check out Abracast.com. Yeah.
You can find Stigmata Studios, graphic, novels, and comic books. Take control of your destiny. Understand your past, put your present in context, and know your future with a twist. Check out the designs and watch the videos about the Abracast Tarot card deck. Your body is your temple, so let's make sure you got a badass t-shirt on it. Variety of cool occult themed t-shirts and other merch like stickers, wall art, mugs, and more. Welcome to the Red Archive. Get access to over 50 hours of archived episodes, more bonus audio, additional exclusive content. All this for only $1 a month. Are you interested in the occult, history, conspiracy, and violence? Learn more at Abracast.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you enjoyed the show. Please send an email or find us on social media and let us know what you think about the show. We would appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rate and review wherever you find your favorite podcasts.